Right. So welcome, everyone. It's really great to see all of you tonight and to have you here for Change Your Mind, Change Your Money with Stacey Tisdale. If you haven't already, make sure you take a moment to say hi in the chat. I know we have some really great conversations going on about TV shows we're binge watching, so I'll have to make sure to save all of these. I think we have all met at this point, but just to be sure, my name is Kylie Davidson, and I'm the coordinator of the Alison R. Bernstein Media Mentoring Program. So tonight we're going to focus on understanding our financial personalities and how we think about money so that we can build our financial confidence. And I'm so thrilled to have Stacy Tisdale with us to lead us through this evening. Stacy is a more than 20-year veteran TV broadcast financial journalist and financial behavior expert, and she is one of the first women and the first African Americans to report from the New York Stock Exchange in her role as a reporter and anchor for Dow Jones Emmy Award-winning Wall Street Journal television. She then went on to become one of the first on-air reporters for CBS MarketWatch and business and personal finance correspondent for CBS News, The Early Show, CBS Evening News, and CBS Radio. Stacy has worked with CNN, CNNI, and HLN, reported for Inside Africa, a weekly news magazine show on CNN International, reported for PBS National News Magazine, Need to Know, and PBS NewsHour Weekend, and was a business correspondent for Al Jazeera America. She was also named by Top 100 magazine as one of the 2019's top 100 people in finance. Stacy is also the author of the critically acclaimed book, The True Cost of Happiness, the real story behind managing your money, and she became one of the pioneering journalists in behavioral finance and financial psychology. She also co-hosts the monthly social media financial empowerment event, Wealth Wednesdays, with iHeartMedia Power 105.1 Breakfast Club host, Angela Yee. The IWL has had the privilege of knowing and working with Stacy through her role on the advisory committee for the Gloria Steinem Endowed Chair in Media, Culture, and Feminist Studies at Rutgers University. As CEO of multimedia content provider Mind Muddy Media, Inc., international speaker, contributor, and expert for some of the leading media outlets in the world, including Time Magazine, Good Morning America, The Breakfast Club, and AJ Impact, Stacy uses her personal finance and media platforms to raise awareness about the psychological and emotional aspects of money, as well as the ways in which socioeconomics, gender, race, age, orientation, and culture play out in our financial experiences and careers. We are so very fortunate to have Stacy with us tonight, and I'm so excited to learn from her wisdom and expertise. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Stacy Tisdale.
Thank you so much, Kylie. And I want to just thank all of you for making the time to spend this evening together in conversation. And I want to thank you. Lisa Hutfield is just an amazing person, and I've worked with her closely on the Gloria Steinem School for Media Studies and Feminist Studies, and just gotten to know her well. And I just am honored to be here. And it's the Alison Bernstein Media Mentoring Program has a special place in my heart, because as I sit here and think of this evening, and I lit a candle for her, Alison Bernstein has a special place in my heart. I was actually reflecting on the last time I saw Alison. We met at a cafe near Grand Central Station, and it was a Monday, and she wanted to talk to me about various projects and all different things, and we had never really met for a long, in-depth conversation. We ended up sitting there for hours, and she noticed a little melancholiness or something in me, and we got into a conversation. And I had pretty recently been divorced, a very amicable divorce. We have a young child and great co-parenting, but my son at the time would spend a week with me and a week with his father. And if you've ever been in that type of a situation, you get something that Alison appropriately named the Sunday Sads, when your child goes to the other parent for a week. And it's a real thing, and this is my only child, so I didn't know what I was experiencing and if it was only me experiencing it. But Ms. Bernstein ended up talking to me for several hours, because she had been in the exact same situation with her own children. And we never got to talk about the projects or anything, but she said at the end of our meeting, we talked about everything we needed to. And she always have a special place in my heart. And just the fact that this school is based on mentoring, and I've experienced her natural mentorship and the mentoring in her DNA just makes me honored to be part of this. So I just wanted to share that story and tell Alison that we feel her strongly. And again, thank you so much for having me. So Kylie, sometimes when I hear that bio read, I don't know who is being talked about. Thank you for reading off all the, I guess, experiences that have come through me in my career. And as she mentioned, I started my career at Wall Street Journal Television, whereas I was a news reporter. I started as a production associate, became reporter anchor. I was there for 7 years. And about that time, CBS News did a merger with an organization called MarketWatch to create a business news division. So Wall Street Journal TV turned into CNBC, which was great, but I left at that time to go to CBS, and I was the first on-air business news reporter. That was interesting for me because Wall Street Journal Television was a very great and very mindful show, but it was really a business focus, and now at CBS, it was much more about the consumer experience with money, or the Main Street's experience with money. So I was at CBS for many years, left there to go do some work with the Committee to Protect Journalists in West Africa, and came back. And after a couple of incarnations, I was soon at CNN for several years, and left CNN to go on to PBS, Today Show, all sorts of things. And I only share that with you because all of those experiences gave me a very unique vantage point to see how people relate to money. And I became very upset when I saw the struggles that people had with money. Because prior to journalism, I was a cash manager on Wall Street, but it's invested as much as $90 million a day. I saw the inner workings of how the economy and the markets work. Money's really just not that complicated. Don't spend more than you have. Don't borrow more than you can afford to pay back. Don't invest more than you can afford to lose. But money, leading cause of depression, leading cause of substance abuse, leading cause of divorce, even the top cause of suicide. So obviously a lot more going on there than dollars and cents. And I remember I was on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange one day doing a report for CNN. And my first story was like, here's 5 tips to help you get out of credit card debt. And my next story was that the average American family had about $20,000 in credit card debt or some crazy number. And I was like, what is it with money? Why can't we get it right? Myself included, when I have all this knowledge about it. There's so much knowledge and information out there. Why can't we just get it right when it came to money? My mother used to say that instead of DNA, I had WHY. And that's probably why I became a journalist. I always have to, why? And that why set me off on what I had no idea was going to be a 6-year research project into what drives financial behavior. And just through the blessing of my career, I had access to the greatest minds in the world for my research. And the answers that I was looking for what drives this financial behavior, I started, I think, in the financial space, but very quickly, that wasn't giving me what I needed. That wasn't giving me the answer. So before I knew it, I was on to psychologists, psychiatrists, sociologists, even spiritual advisors to find out what's really going on in this relationship that we have with money. And then the problem became pretty clear. When we have trouble with money, we go straight to the numbers. I have to earn more, I have to spend more, I have to save more, when the real causes of our financial experience have got absolutely nothing to do with numbers. It's much more the result of our conditioning, which we'll break down in a little bit later, and the way the things our conditioning makes us believe about ourselves. So before we get into all that, the way that we stand up to some of those influences and forces that we're going to discuss is by having a very, very deep connection to who we really are, more specifically, what we really are, and what are our own priorities and values. And that connection will help you start to see your goals. You'll start to see where you're getting knocked off course. And you'll start to see that there's a lot more to you than your mind would have you believe. So I'm going to start by having us all do a little exercise, but even before I get to that, I just wanted to set the landscape a little bit and talk about some of the things that are new in the economy that we're facing for women, particularly, as I want us to keep this in our context. So we've had 47 million women have to leave the workforce since the pandemic. We've had nearly 3/4 say that the crisis has had an impact on how long they could live off their retirement savings. Women need more money in retirement because they live about 11 years longer than men. We have over 4 million women losing employer-related healthcare coverage. These are some of the new dynamics that we're living in. There's some things that are not new that I also want us to focus on. Women know how to problem solve and resolve challenges. Women control the majority of the world's wealth, controlling 60% of all personal wealth in the United States alone. Women will manage the majority of $41 trillion in wealth by 2052. And only about 20% of women rate themselves as being prepared to make financial decisions. So I think we have a small enough group. You let me know, Kylie, that we can be a little interactive.
Absolutely, that'd be wonderful.
So I want to hear some of your feedback on what you think is happening in your personal economies, in the way that we've seen dynamics change for women. And I know that you have a lot to say if you were so astute on what's happening with the wilds.
Well, I personally, I graduated into the pandemic. So I definitely, I guess we're going to compare it to the wilds. Like, I relate in the sense that I thought the world, they were thinking about they were going to be in one place, and then they ended up in a completely different reality. And I know I'm not the only one, right, that has been like struggling with just getting a foot in the door, but also I know that my particular circumstances and my relationship with money is very much rooted in a lot of like working class, like, because I come from a low income working class home. So yeah.
So you're like a lot of people, you're kind of feeling like you don't know what to do differently. And like you're not, yeah, I'm with you on that. Does anyone else want to share how they're experiencing their womanhood and the economy over the last year?
I'll say that earlier in the, I'm Beth Eisen, I'm a mentor of Frankie. Hi. And earlier in the pandemic, I was concerned because I work for a nonprofit that I was going to get laid off. And that has huge financial implications, right? And I wound up taking a Coursera course hosted by Yale University on the happiness of, like, the science of happiness. And there's one course within that that was about your relationship with money. And the like thing that stood out to me in that moment was like, there was a study done that said up until the point that you're making $70,000, like 70,000 is like the target. And once you're like happily living on $70,000, it's not like, what am I going to eat? Where am I going to go? Where am I going to sleep? Those levels of concern. And then once you hit that threshold, you think you're worth like double what you're being paid. And like when you're making $40,000, you're going for 70. When you're making $50,000, you're going for 70. And when you get to 70, you're like, oh, I'm worth 140 now. And like you get to 80, you're like, I'm worth 160. And like, it's never enough because that's how we're conditioned. And I found myself during the pandemic trying to understand, like, what am I worth? And trying to do that in the context of, well, if I'm laid off, what am I worth? If I retain my job, what am I worth? And I wound up retaining my job and taking on a consulting job And so now I'm making more money than I thought in the beginning of the pandemic, but like all of that anxiety was very real.
I'm so with you on all of that. I think we all had to reinvent ourselves after this pandemic, and this will definitely be something that we talk about. 5 times the size of my business, literally over the last year, almost year to date. And I at that moment, I didn't dream that was going to happen. And that goes back to a lot of the resourcefulness of women. Anyone else want to share what this year's been like for them?
We do have a comment in the chat that talks about being at a place where I want to build financial independence and I'm interested in exploring stocks and investments, but I feel very unprepared, from Imani Johnson.
Imani, we're going to get to that. It's just a feeling. You're not unprepared, and it's never, ever, ever been easier to invest. We'll talk about that and what we can all learn from GameStop for sure. So financial wellness is an idea, and we tend to define ourselves by our financial circumstance, and that's all very thought-based. We're trying to get out of our minds a little bit. So I want you to all think about 3 scenarios that are going to help you clarify your goals. And all financial planning should start with a clear picture of your goals, but your authentic goals, not your socially driven goals. So the first scenario, these are called the Kinder questions. They're by a great financial planner and mentor of mine, George Kinder, who starts his planning process this way. So imagine you have all the money in the world and you will have it for your entire life. Money will never, ever, 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 ever be a problem. So if making money is not a concern, what are you doing with your life? What are you doing with your time? If money is not something that you have to worry about, how would your life be different than it is now? What are you doing? So I want you all to take a second and get with that. Money is never, ever going to be a problem. What do your days look like? Are you writing a book? Are you somewhere else? What does it feel like? We just spoke about anxiety. Money wasn't a problem. How do you think you'd feel? Lean into that feeling. Scenario number 2. You've just gone to the doctor and she tells you that you have 5 to 10 years left to live. It's not going to be a long, painful, drawn out death. It's going to be fast. With 5 to 10 years left to live, what are you going to do with your life? What are you going to do with your time? Where are you going to be? Who are you going to be with? You have 5 to 10 years left to live. Think about that, 5 to 10 years left to live. What does that feel like? What feels important to you? Scenario number 3. We go back to this doctor. We don't like her very much. And she tells us, this is it. You have 1 day left. The question isn't, what are you going to do on the last day? The question is, what do you regret? What do you regret not doing in this precious life that's about to end? So what these questions, when I think about them, I even feel different. What these questions do is they help people clarify what matters to them. And I want you to all, you can reach out to me, but keep these in your mindset when you think about money, because they also help clarify how and where we spend resources on things and energy on things that aren't that important to us. So I want to hear from you all. What are some of the things that came up to you? Did anyone have any kind of aha moments? Like, why am I working so hard on this when at the end of the day, it's not that important to me? Did that help clarify some goals for any of you?
We also have another comment. Lisa Ferrandino shared that it's so funny how money doesn't have anything to do with my answers to these 3 questions.
Did anyone else have that experience?
Yes, I did. I felt that my answers were exactly the same for all 3, which was shocking. And money had nothing to do with it.
What were some of the things that they revealed?
Commitment to things that I always am committed to, but how important friends were and how important home was.
Did anyone else have anything that came up that they'd like to share?
I can.
And yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was thinking about my relationship to risk. That's kind of what I thought of throughout every question, and my comfort level with risk, and wishing that I would be more comfortable taking more risks.
Very interesting. So when you think about this, did anyone see any areas where it's more, I guess, things that didn't come up, where you see, okay, I'm working so hard with my time, with my job to make money for some ideal that at the end of the day is not that important to me? So why do we spend time and effort and energy on things that are not that important to us? The reason is something called money scripts. Money scripts think of them just like an actor rehearses a script until they can blindly follow it. We blindly follow our money scripts. They're the result of conditioning. And these scripts lead us into areas that often don't reflect what's really important to us. So I learned all this when I was doing the research for my book. And what I realized was that I've just had the experience, the exposure to talk to everyone from people starving in Africa to presidents and everybody in between. And I realized that when it came to money, they were saying the same 3 things in different ways. So I identified the 3 major money scripts that drive all of our financial behavior, our choices, and our belief system in one way or another. They're first, childhood scripts. Believe it or not, the way you saw money handled or not, discussed or not, you only saw heard money being discussed when it was around an argument. All of these things, they literally set the stage in your brain for what's normal. So you're always measuring, how you should be with money, how you should feel about money with your childhood scripts. So it's very important to understand what were the messages that I got about money when I was growing up. And this is not an exercise in blaming mom and dad, because guess what? They had their own money scripts to deal with. So I'm interested to hear what some of your reflections are on that. What are some of the major messages that you got about money when you were growing up? Me, for example, I was a figure skater, and I actually left home when I was 11 years old to go live with various coaches and train in different parts of the country. So one of my very first messages about money was not to think about it, not to worry about it, because you skate, you focus, you do your job, we'll worry about everything else. You see that with a lot of athletes. And another money script that I got growing up that I realized later in life was I also always grew up in situations of racial isolation. I grew up an only child, pretty privileged. My parents were two amazing people. We could have a whole discussion on some of the amazing things they accomplished in the world, and I'm sure wherever they are now. And they, always wanted the best for me. They grew up poor in the South, so they sent me to the best schools. I got, the opportunities to figure skate. And then when my skating career led me to live in places like Lake Placid, New York, Janesville, Wisconsin. I think I was the only Black person in the city of Janesville, Wisconsin, if not the state at the time. But I'm kidding. But I grew up in racial isolation. So that feeling of not fitting in was always my natural state. My father was very active in politics and community service. And he was actually the first Black in the 4th District of Connecticut, that congressional district, to get the Democratic nomination for Congress. My mother, there's a school named after her. There's, huge community service. So I would be away in these places, then I'd come back and live my life with my parents, who were very committed to helping people in underserved communities. And I wouldn't fit in Black environments either. So I wasn't quite fitting in white environments. I wasn't quite fitting in Black environments. That gave me a unique perspective to see how all people are the same in certain ways. But I also had to assimilate. And I remember when I was younger, I was to a private school in Connecticut, and I did a lot of bullying. And the guy who was like the lead bullier, I remember I noticed one day I was buying a soda in a soda machine, and I asked him if he wanted one. And he said yes, and I bought him one, and he was nice to me for a little while. I got that message of buy people things and they'll be nice to you. And I got that message of doing things like taking the blame for people and things. And I saw, especially as I did this examination, I saw how those things materialized later in my life. And those lessons are you don't realize it, but those early lessons, they play out in your financial experience. And money's greatest gift, and as far as I'm concerned, its only purpose, is it can reflect back to you where you are not living in step with who you truly are. And that's what it should be used for. But I'm interested to hear from some of you all. What are some of your childhood scripts? What are some of those early messages that you got about money growing up? Think about things like debt. Think about things like investing. You mentioned risk taking. Think about those things. What are some of those early messages that you got about money?
Well, I can remember one message, indirect, was the way to get money is to work. And I remember that my mother was a teacher, and when she wanted a new car or something beyond the regular budget, she would go back to teaching, earn some money, and she was in and out of the teaching workforce. And I remember also a moment, I'm not sure, as a teenager, in which she was very clear, said to me, you have to have your own money. And just because you marry someone with money doesn't mean he will share it with you. This was a great shock to me. So it was a clear and interesting message around what is the relationship between marriage and money. And her thought to me, you had to have your own.
Awesomely interesting. Anyone else want to share some of their childhood messages? And actually, Lisa, how do you think those messages are affecting you today?
Well, I'm still working. No, I think I took them to heart. That was a very strong motivator and in my case, my husband and I never really blended our money. We shared certain amount, but we kept separate accounts. That was, I don't know, in our day, that was a little different.
Very different, very different. And what's interesting is I'm guessing those messages serve you well.
Yes, I think so.
Yeah. Did anyone think about anything? Think about the messages that you got, like about investing, just from what you were seeing, saving money, debt. Did anyone come up with any money scripts that they think might need to be rewritten? And it's really that simple.
Yeah, I mean, with my family, my dad owned like a mom and pop grocery store. So it was just all about constantly saving, constantly saving. I mean, I think in my entire childhood, we went on like 2 or 3 vacations, and they were always to Florida or something. So even now, I struggle with like going on vacation, and I see my friends go on, annual trips with their family, and that's not something that we ever did. And it's just weird. Like I'll sometimes go out to eat dinner with friends at like a really nice, expensive restaurant, and I feel guilty about it where I'm like, I could have just went to Chipotle and it would have been the same exact thing, but for, like so much cheaper. And so I struggle with this guilt that I have because my parents are constantly saving and they still do today.
What do you think their experience growing up was like with money?
Yeah, so I mean, both of their parents actually own their own grocery stores too. So I know that like my mom lived like the second floor, the first floor was the grocery store. Like I know that they also were both, grew up in that same environment of, constantly saving. I know that their parents and my grandparents never went on vacation. Their vacations were their honeymoon and that was it. So I know that that's been passed on, and I try to break that. And I talk to my sister, who she's a doctor, so she makes great money. And I mean, we both have student loans and everything, but we talk about how we need to live our lives. We can't, always be trying to find a coupon to everything.
You just brought up so many wonderful things, and thank you for sharing that. When the greatest thing about what we're really made of is we have the ability to witness. And I think one of the most important things that you can do to help improve your financial life is to meditate and build that ability to, when things come up, you don't have to identify with them, because as soon as you see you're in a pattern, you're also free from it. So when that comes up for you and your sister, I want us to get you to a point where you can say, oh, there's that, and just leave it and try stillness, and something different will emerge. You'll see it. You don't have to identify with it. You don't have to feel guilty for backing away from it. Just don't fight with it. It's conditioning. It's not who you are. And that's what our financial circumstance can sometimes make us forget who we really are. But it's conditioning. That was a beautiful share. Does anyone else have any childhood scripts they'd like to share?
So I was kind of first coming to conscious about money during the Great Recession, because I was in kind of late elementary school when you're starting to really understand money as like, oh, I need this much to buy this gum at the store. And so that I have always been very conscious about saving, very weird about debt. My mom is definitely someone who's like, oh, credit card debt, not a big deal. This is embarrassing at 25, I don't have a credit card, because which I'm aware is a problem. And I've actually tried to get one in the past couple months and have been denied due to lack of credit. But because I have such money noise about, I don't want to go into too much debt because I don't want to be like the Great Recession. And so
You're a millennial.
Yes, I'm 25. And so that was definitely something that I was very cognizant about in my teens. And I've always been like an obsessive saver. I commuted in large part to college to kind of minimize my student loan debt. I was a nut job and paid off on just under $18,000 of student loan debt in 18 months because I was so concerned I wouldn't be able to pay it back, because I am a news producer and we make not great money. So I've always had that money noise, and especially fear of debt.
Practical advice. I want you to download an app called Self Lender. Actually, if you guys go to, I just launched a new site with Angela Yee called teamwealthwednesdays.com. And if you go to the Financial Wellness Center, and there's like 3 buttons, and I think one's credit building, it'll take you into self. So I just fixed your building credit issue and credit card issue. You're done.
Thank you.
Millennials are my favorite generation, and I'm a Gen Xer in number, but I'm such a millennial in spirit. I just so relate to this generation. As a financial journalist for over 20 years, they've been my favorite generation to study. You are truly now the biggest and the most unique generation in history, because you came of age during the Great Recession. So we've all been told, go to school, work hard, save for retirement, and retire. And that's, what a nice life will look like. And that equation adds up. You're one of the first generations it so didn't add up for. It just kind of blew up in your faces. You got saddled with, you have unprecedented amount of student loan debt. We're talking about how, you all see, and we'll get into social conditioning in just a minute, but the messages and images we see, that's also one of the big 3 money scripts, social scripts. You had images of crashing markets. You had images of people losing fortunes. Your own families went through things. Millennials have the exact same habits of people who grew up in the Great Depression. They're good savers. They're risk averse when it comes to things like debt and investing because of your conditioning. So the dance here with all of this, for all of us in every part of our lives, and for me, money was just the way that I can hope to show people this, is to learn how to manage your conditioning. And again, when you think about your goals, step away from those messages that don't serve you. But I think millennials get stereotyped so much as, they're just awful things. They're lazy, they're entitled, they're whatever. And remember, most of the people stereotyping you are from the me generation. Okay, boomers. And I think one of the things that really speaks to the strongest character of your generation and the fact that there's something bigger at work than our minds is you responded to getting handed the worst economy in history by creating the sharing economy and the gig economy. And that's transformed global financial markets. So I think that says a lot about your generation. And you just have to be aware of some of the patterns that have sprung up in your conditioning, and know when you're, just like anything, know when you're in them. And our willingness in money and relationships and everything is to call ourselves out and say, oh, that's not who I am, and just kind of leave it and just trust. Confidence is faith. They're the same thing. And just trust that something bigger will transcend. And the more you lean into what's important to you and your goals, the more that'll happen naturally. But some great shares. Before we move on to social scripts, does anyone have something they need to get out about childhood scripts? They're big. Okay.
Because it was opposite. I actually wasn't encouraged to save growing up because all my money instantly went to the collective. Like, I physically remember me getting birthday money, putting it in my piggy bank and not seeing it again. You know what I mean? Not seeing it again, because it just automatically went to the collective. And my little brain was like, okay, but now, especially since I'm the driver of the family and stuff, I see those lack of boundaries more, and how I almost feel guilt too when I get money. I almost feel guilty because I feel like I need to be giving it away almost. So it's but I recognize that, right? So I'm seeing those patterns and stuff, but it's I definitely know that it's because of my own upbringing and stuff.
And your story and your example is so clear to all of us. I'm sure you all heard in that story that, when you tell me your name again, I'm sorry.
Nydia,
that when Nydia makes money, she feels like she should be giving it away. And we see obviously that you were conditioned in that way. And we also see the absurdity of that, but how that childhood script has that grip on her. So take note and grow. Very impressed that you see, oh, I'm in this pattern. That's true of all of our scripting. You can't see the absurdity of it until you step out of it. Thank you all for your shares. So that's childhood scripts. Those are big. And there's also social scripts. Social scripts come in three forms. There's social scripting around advertising. The media is always telling us what it means to be normal, what we need to give our children to make them normal kids. There's social scripting around gender, which is what we're going to talk about most, and there's social scripting around culture and race. So I'll share a story. My mother was a long-time educator, and from teacher to principal over, I think, 50-year career. And she used to do one of these things at her school where she'd make Jetty dollars. Her name was Jetty. She'd put herself on a dollar, and she'd get, all sorts of donations of toys and all sorts of things for the kids. And she worked in low-income, impoverished communities. And she would, around Christmas and Thanksgiving, she'd bring all the parents in and she'd give them Jetty dollars and let them go shop for things for their kids and give their kids gifts. And she also, there'd be like a big raffle for like $1,000 or something. So it was a big thing in the community. So one year a mother won the raffle, and someone asked her, what are you going to do with the money? And she said, the first thing she said, I'm going to go buy my son something like an iPad. You can imagine all the critiques, the people saying, she should be putting it in the bank, or she should be investing it, or she should be whatever. Where can you not look around and see a message that normal kids have an iPad? It's in advertising, it's in everything, it's in whatever. Was this woman irresponsible and frivolous? No. What did she want? For her kid to be normal. We see, oh my God, when I did my research, the humans saw an average of 60,000 ads a day, and that was like almost a decade ago. I can't even imagine what it is now. But we get all of these messages from society to live a certain way. We feel that pressure to keep up with the Joneses and do what our friends are doing. And we're very not compassionate about how we respond, how we judge this conditioning in other people or ourselves. I told you people were very critical of this woman. We're also very critical of ourselves. My friend has, they're doing this with their kids, or they live in this house, or they have these things. I need to do that myself. And, we're called out. Oh, you're stuck in that keeping up with the Joneses thing, and that's a bad thing. Throw all that nonsense out. In 1812, sociologist Leon Festinger created the social comparison theory. The way that our brains, this is literal, the way that our brains value us, the way we, that sense of how we feel about ourselves, it does it by comparing us to people around us. So those feelings are comparison. That's normal. All of those things, those things of wanting what advertisers tell you, that's normal. And they know that. And I remember I've always raised my son to be mindful of that. I've been in high, top tier C-suite advertising meetings, and especially for young people, they're, the way that they target market, tell them this, they'll believe this, and that, and they're trying to trick you. They're trying to make you believe that what they tell you need is more important than what your instincts. Think about what those things that came up to you are important in those questions. So my son would be watching, he's 15 now, he'd be watching TV when he was little, and I I noticed my work was rubbing off on him a little bit. He's like, they're telling me I need those sneakers. They're trying to trick me. So it's just all things like, it's all things like that. But just know that conditioning, it makes us feel, gives us feelings that we perceive as real. So again, the trick is to know when you're in those when those things are catching you. There's also social scripting around ethnicity and race. Some groups are perceived to be financially illiterate. Some groups are perceived to be obsessed with money. Some groups are perceived to be not good with money. I remember in my book, when I was writing my book, a very close friend of our family's had, her mother died, her brother died, and her father and her daughter found out she had cancer all in the same week. And this woman was financially well off because she had a very successful catering and restaurant business. And she was working to open another one. And this was going on in her life, which is full stop. But she's working to manage her business. She's working like crazy to open her other one. And I remember I saw her one day, and she was gray. And I'm like, Maria, you really better take care of yourself. You're whatever. She's like, it's my Italian work ethic. If it doesn't hurt, you're not doing the right thing. If you're not working till it's painful, you're not doing the right thing. And she was saying it kind of jokingly, but she didn't realize how much that was really driving her. And I know with Blacks, there's just so much negative stereotypes about Blacks and money going back to the beginning of time. And we often forget that, Black buying power in the United States is about $1.5 trillion. Black women are the fastest growing group of entrepreneurs in the country. Prior to COVID, Black households, well, we know about the wealth gap, but and households earning $75,000 or more or $200,000 or more, Blacks were the fastest growing group. But I remember speaking to a group of young Black women, the group called Figure Skating in Harlem, and I was asking them, what was the first thing that comes to mind when they think about Blacks and money? And they were just like, debt, don't know anything about money, don't save. And they weren't seeing that they were talking about themselves. And I was telling them it wasn't true. And the story of Black wealth in the United States is a study that everybody can learn from. The Black economy in the US really started with President Lincoln freed the slaves. So Lincoln freed the slaves, and he realized that, gosh, these people have been enslaved, and I haven't allowed them, they haven't been allowed to learn about money. They have nowhere to put their money. So he opened something called the Freedmen's Bank for these newly freed slaves to build wealth and learn about money. Within 10 years of that bank opening, and I normally know the dates, but I'm afraid to say them, 18 something, because I just don't want to get it wrong for you all. But within 10 years of the opening of the Freedmen's Bank, those freed slaves amassed $60 million in those days' terms. These are freed slaves, $60 million. They built towns, they built communities, they built hospitals, they built schools. Due to corruption, the government came in and took the deposits from the Freedmen's Bank and used them to build the Treasury Annex building, which is why when Jacob Lew was Treasury Secretary a few years ago, he renamed the Treasury Annex building the Freedmen's Bank. So it's estimated that $60 million would have been about $7 trillion in wealth in the Black community today. Tremendous setback, the financial, the psychological, the emotional devastation. Then you had the Great Migration, when about 4 million Blacks left the South, and I did a study with the Equal Justice Institute, largely to run away from fear of lynching, walking away from land values, that are now the green belt, millions worth millions and millions of dollars. You see like Black Wall Street in Tulsa, when Blacks had built such a thriving community and that was just taken from them. So the wealth building power within the Black community is incredible. As I told you, fastest growing income group, fastest growing group of entrepreneurs. Can you think of many groups that could have survived those setbacks? That the mindset, this poverty mindset, is not only it's incorrect and it's paralyzing. So it's very important to understand what your race and your culture, how that's influencing what you believe about yourself, because it's what you believe about yourself that's going to impact your decisions. So I'm interested to hear from some of you, what are some of the messages that you think, because of your culture, your race, that you're getting about money? Think about, what do I see people like me doing when it comes to money? What do I see people like me not doing when it comes to money? What are some of the messages that you think you get from your cultural money scripts?
Well, I can say that my father his family came over from Russia during the pogroms and lost everything they had. And so there was a immigrant family notion that you had to save money and work, always work. I was expected to work from the time I was old enough to babysit or whatever, and have been working ever since. But there was fear. There was an enormous amount of fear. So I think that we underestimate often the amount of fear that is behind these scripts.
Without question.
Yeah.
Anyway, you made me think of an interesting example of how cultural money scripts work out. I was speaking at Rider College, and at the end of my speech about millennials, I love millennials, and at the end of my speech, a Chinese girl came up to me, crying. It's like, was I that bad? And I asked her what was wrong, and she told me she just got accepted into Harvard Business School. So now I'm really like, problem? And she said, in Chinese culture, debt is the Antichrist. It's a no-go. So her parents would not let her take out student loans to take advantage of this opportunity. And she herself thought it was an opportunity that she had to pass up because it would require debt. So it's very interesting how deep these cultural money scripts play out. Did anyone else have anything they wanted to share about the cultural money scripts?
I think for me, it's very similar to Rebecca. I come from an Italian-American family, and it's all about hard work, making an honest living, not taking risks, taking the safe bet.
So you two related to that story I was telling you about my Italian friend?
Yes, I did. It really struck a chord with me and my background. But I think my parents worked for the state, they worked for the county, they had just safe jobs, where they had benefits, and that was just an amazing accomplishment for them. And for me, they almost deterred me from going to college, like just the risk involved with taking student loans and, just doing something different than what they were told to do. So the fact that I went to college and, that I have a career now making a salary that they never thought that they would see, in their lives it just means a lot to them, and it means a lot to me too.
Awesome. So you transcended your money scripts.
I think so. But it wasn't easy. Like, when I first decided to go to college and sort of break the script, there was a struggle and a lot of conversations with my parents and explaining the why, but I guess I did it.
Yeah, because our mind is telling us this isn't right, this isn't right, this isn't right. Our minds are, their job is to create thoughts, and we buy into those thoughts. And these exercises will help us not necessarily do that. But race, scriptures about race and culture are huge. I was speaking to someone earlier today about there's a lot of stereotypes around Jewish culture and money. Jewish people are, obsessed with money and are very good with money. And we were talking about how, I don't know, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years ago in Europe, when Jews were not allowed to own land and they weren't allowed to farm, they weren't allowed to basically participate in the economy. So they basically created money as a store of value to make commerce between them, amongst themselves. And that's why, some groups have, histories in farming. And Jewish culture, that history is in money. So that's, a lot of that early conditioning is because of that. And what's fascinating is you can trace these cultural money scripts back to events in history and things like that, and see how deeply they run, and you see how long and how deeply we carry them. But it's in some intense stuff. Does anyone else have any thing they want to share on cultural money scripts before we move on to gender scripts, which are always fun?
I do want to share, Lisa Ferrandino mentioned her microphone's not working, but she wrote that she can relate to your friend with the gray hair. I was brought up with the mentality that you have to work hard for what you want. And if you're not working hard, you won't get what you want.
All of those things. Definitely all of those things. Yeah, we'll bring this all full circle.
I was going to say about the culture script intersecting with the gender script in the culture I come from, which is the sort of New England WASP culture. There's a certain expectation that you will invest in the stock market, that's what people do. And yet, growing up, it was what the men do. That's what the men talked about. It was very much a gendered enterprise. But certainly, there was always talk about the markets. And we lived very close to New York City. My father commuted to New York. It was part of being a business person that you invest in the stock market. And I do remember, again, my mother joined a stock market club at the high school, one of those things. And I remember her going once a week to the stock market club. And it was the first time I had the notion that, I guess women could do that also. And I think in terms of the gendered scripts and investing, I think we're still, there's a lot of ground we need to cover to learn more about that, to get the confidence. I mean, I see that all the time in my cohort, my age group. Suddenly women on their own, and they've never managed the money, that kind of thing. And with our students, the same thing. So I'm really eager to hear you talk about how do we get into the market? What kinds of investings do you start in your 20s? Do you start in your 30s? That kind of thing. Because I do think that's a big and important aspect for women's financial wellness.
Definitely. And we're going to get there.
I just wanted to add something, Lisa, and that is that my aunt was brilliant at the stock market, but because she worked for a stockbroker, and her job was secretary, and it was to get his laundry and to get his coffee, etc. And she would give him tips, and she never got beyond being a secretary. And it actually broke her because she was a genius at the stock market. So it is a terrible, it was a way of holding power that the men had, and it was very serious.
That's interesting. Do you know women perform much better in the stock market than men, much better. And one of the reasons that they do is because women will hold to an investment. And men, because, okay, thank you for the segue into gender. But I'm couldn't have done it better. Investing is a great way to look at it. So women do better in stocks than men because they buy and hold. And that is how you make money in the stock market. Stocks are a long-term investment. And men trade stocks more. They buy and sell. They chase return more. Women are much more goal-oriented when it comes to money, and men are much more return-oriented. So let's get into our scripting. Since the beginning of, I don't know when, men have been scripted that they have to provide and protect. Provide and protect. And women have been scripted to be nurturers. So we have different values around money. Women are much more their financial choices are tied much more to their goals. And men's financial choices are much more tied to returns. And I have created a financial education program called Winning Plays. And it's for elementary through high school students. And in the lesson about money, scripts, and gender, I have the kids read a case study about what happens to a man and a woman when they walk into a car dealership. And they pretty much got it. The woman's going to be charged a higher rate because women are stereotyped to be financially illiterate. And they got all the obvious things. That whole provide and protect, nurturing disparity conditioning. Look how it plays out in real time. Things like the pay gap. We give men more money for doing the exact same things as women because of that whole backdrop. They're the providers, they're protectors, even though the reality is that women are heads of households now at a much higher rate than men, and just all sorts of things. But those stereotypes have affected our belief system. And as I was telling you, women control the majority of the world's wealth, despite all the crap that we're subjected to. But only a fraction of women believe that they're capable of making financial decisions. It's that belief system that we really, really have to work on. I'll get back to you with an interesting story on that, but we all have conditioning that we need to be able to see, men included. And what I thought about when my financial education program was being piloted in schools in Connecticut, I sat in a class, totally hidden in the back, trying to blend in as a student just to watch how a teacher was delivering it. And she was on this gender lesson, and it was in an underprivileged neighborhood. And she was talking about, men being conditioned to provide and protect. And a Cambridge University study finds that when men are unemployed for longer than 6 weeks, they actually start to undergo physiological changes and start moving into clinical and chemical depression. This is what unemployment does. Again, this is how strong conditioning is, that belief I'm supposed to provide and protect. When you can't do it, their sense of self is tied to that, just like women's sense of self is tied to that nurturing. So she's teaching this lesson, and this boy raises his hand and he's like, maybe that's why my father left. And she's like, what do you mean? And he said, well, if he's supposed to, he could never get a job, he could never get his life going. And if he couldn't do the one thing that he's been told and programmed that he's supposed to do, maybe that's why he left. And think about that. Because sometimes in financially stressed communities and families, you see a big exodus of males from the family. So then this girl raises her hand and she's like, do you know in lions, when the male starts having to take resources away from the cubs, they actually leave the family? And we were talking about in all these animal species, when males start, there's not enough of the kill to go around, the males leave. So it's very interesting to see how this plays out in real time, and just think of it in like disadvantaged communities where I saw your cat turn your head in the background, where we have this, there's such character assassinations because of what people's financial circumstances, their financial lives. We believe that about them. We believe it says something about their character, like debt levels. The number one reason people go into debt is because of an accident. It's health, divorce, or those things that, they used to put people in jail because of debt. Just think of it, it's not money. Again, money is an amazing energy. It reflects back to us where we're not living in line with our values. It's the meaning that we make of it that we have to take responsibility for. And once you take control of that, your wealth will start flowing your way. It's an abundance mentality. So women have just really been tripped out. We weren't allowed to own land. We weren't allowed to have Gloria. Lisa and I were talking about Gloria Steinem, who's like a mother to me. And we were talking about women not being allowed to have credit cards. And it was like 80s. It's like not nearly as far away as you think, needing men to co-sign for loans. So we've been getting this constant messaging about money. And since our society ties finances so much to self-worth, we have a lot of insecurity issues that are reflected in our financial issues. Women don't negotiate as often as men do. And I was reading a study, 57% of male graduate students negotiate their first salary versus 7% of female graduating students. And not negotiating your first salary costs you $500,000 over the life of your career. So we also get a lot of flack, like it's our fault. Oh, women don't negotiate, a lot of that. Let's drop all of that. As I said, women are not return oriented when it comes to money. They're goal oriented, and that's nothing to be criticized for. It's something to know about yourself. So if I know, if I do something I love, the last thing I'm thinking of, again, me, and that's my childhood conditioning, don't worry about money. The last thing I think about is money. So knowing that about myself, then I know, if I'm going to go for a job interview, I should look up the salary, because I'm not going to think to bring it up. Just know your own patterns, know your own tendencies. And, so that you can compensate for them. But there's nothing wrong with you. You were born perfect, which we'll get to. You were born perfectly you, but money will make you forget that. And Lisa mentioned the intersection of gender and money and our culture and money. And a very interesting story. I mentioned George Kendor, the great financial planner. He tells me that I always share this story because it's so, I think, pulls together the whole package. So a Black woman came into his office. George was based in Boston, and she was very agitated and very upset. She came into his office and she was like, I have to save $1 million. I need $1 million. And he was like, okay. It's like, sit down, have a glass of water. And he started asking her questions about herself. So he said, what do you do? And she was a doctor. So then in his mind, saving $1 million isn't that far out of the question. And then as he talked to her more, she practiced medicine in underserved communities. She practiced medicine for people who couldn't afford, healthcare and medicine and all these types of things. So he saw the disconnect. He saw this does not sound like someone who $1 million is authentically important to. So he started asking her more questions. So it turns out this Black woman who was a doctor lived with her white male boyfriend who was a stockbroker. So think about all of those money scripts that are coming up. He's white in her mind. He knows more about money than me. He's male. in her mind, he knows more about me. He's a stockbroker. Come on. In her mind, he knows more about me. And he was always fond of saying, it takes $1 million to raise a child these days. It takes $1 million to raise a child these days. It takes $1 million to raise a child these days. Did this woman want $1 million? No, she wanted a baby. And it was so funny, that's so obvious to us, she couldn't see it when she was in it. So George pointed that out to her, and then they talked about what did she value, what was important to her in raising a child. And it was a lot less than $1 million to get a child to 18 years old. And we put her on a financial plan. She worked with him for a few months, and now she had that aha moment. And he called me. George helped me a lot with the research for my book. And he called me about a year into it. He's like, you won't believe what happened. And I'm like, what? He's like, I saw, what's her name, walking down the street, pushing a baby stroller with a new boyfriend. I was like, that's like my favorite money story. And that just shows you how if we don't see these money scripts, they will run the show. So it's very important to talk about them, and we can, and we know we need to have these important conversations about social injustice and economic injustice and all of the things that happen to women and the things that happen to minorities around money. But the real danger, to tell you the truth, is when we start believing those things about ourselves. So for the moment, I'm much more interested in having you all answer the question within yourself, why do I fit some of my stereotypes? And then you'll get into, because of the scripting, because of the conditioning, and then you'll start to see when you're in these patterns, and that's how you will free yourself from them. So that's a lot. Does anybody have any questions or comments before we go into some number stuff? Does anybody?
Could you elaborate more on that question?
Which question?
The how do we fit into our stereotypes, specifically with the scripts?
So women, remember I said that women, only a fraction of women feel like they're capable of making financial decisions. We control the world's wealth and we outperform men in investing. So that's kind of not true. But a woman will walk into a car dealership and not negotiate. She will not negotiate for a raise. I had a friend who was a very, very high level financial advisor, the only super high net worth clients. And she said she was hiring someone for, she's at a major investment firm. And she said a guy and girl came in to interview. She's like, they were the identical person on paper, Harvard Business School, same degrees, same background. And when they got to the part of the interview where they asked about salary, the male, he was very clear on what he wanted. And the woman just said, well, what do you offer for the job? And would take that. So she ended up hiring the man because of his self-assertiveness and stuff. But we have to, once you really are willing to take a holistic and honest look at your money scripting, you're going to see places where it's surfacing. You're going to see, why am I working so hard to have a car like my neighbors? Why am I, working so hard to work so hard? Oh, it's that social scripting. It's that you're going to see parts of your life where you're fitting the scripting, where you're following the scripting, and those are where you're captive and where you're bonded is that exact spot where you will be set free. So when you see some of your patterns, that's where you can free yourself from them. So the key is being able to see them. So that's what I mean. The question for you, the questions we constantly have to ask ourselves is, okay, what are some of the messages I grew up with? What are the ones that are serving me? What are the ones that need to be changed? And that's when you have to, really ask them, where am I fitting my stereotypes? So for me, I was a Black female financial journalist. If you close your eyes and you imagine what an expert in money looks like, I started being a Black female financial journalist like in my 20s. I am not the person who comes to mind. I wasn't even the person who came to mind for myself. And that's something that I've always had to fight in my career. And I remember a news director and a network, I could say it, Roger Ailes, who we've all come to know his story a little bit, I was always, I was one of the few financial journalists who actually worked on Wall Street. So I was very more qualified than a lot of others from that standpoint. I, had the on-air experience, that production experience. I've definitely paid my journalism dues, but I just had a really hard time on my career ladder. And I remember just him saying to me, "You just don't look like a business expert." And I came across very young, and you just don't look like a business expert. And I remember being very antagonistic, and I'm like, "Oh yeah, well, you're going to have to change your definition of what a business news expert looks like." And I went on this battle, and then I eventually realized that was never going to be a battle I was going to win. It was one I was going to transcend. There's more to us than our minds tell us. There's more to us than our conditioning tells us. There's more to us than our belief systems. And that's where something called what I call our signature strengths come in. So intuition, instinct, our ability to witness that feeling of right and wrong, knowing when something's right, knowing when something's wrong, the ability to love, the ability to learn. We were born with these things. We were born with everything we need to achieve our goals. We were born perfect. Our conditioning, our money scripts is what knocks us off course. So, we have this whole other dimension of superpowers. We stay so trapped in, our surface images of ourselves that we forget about our superpowers. And whatever created us with such unconditional love that it doesn't ask even to be acknowledged. They're just kind of there in silence. Have you ever had one of those experiences where you say something really smart and you're like, who said that? And if you remember what happened, your mind was silent. So it's really remembering what you are and what you're really made of that will help you transcend those money scripts. And my favorite money mantra is by Swami Muktananda. And it's, "You are already perfect. If you don't believe that, it is due to a poverty of your understanding. Get rid of that understanding and you will become rich." So I'm telling you, once you learn how to step out of your mind, get to connect with what's important to you, abundance will follow. Abundance will flow. We have to create a plan around that. We have to create goals. Goals should be SMART. SMART, the S in SMART, specific. If I know I want to have $1,000 in an emergency fund by December, I know by June I have to have $500 in that emergency fund. Goals like, oh, I want to save more, spend less, they're not specific, nor are they, the M in SMART, measurable. You want to be able to measure your success, because every time you have a small victory, our brains are just incredible instruments. And in my work, you eventually just, why? You do that deep dive into, why are we like this? And our brains, when you have a goal, your brain just starts this whole process to make it true. When you have a belief, it just starts this whole process. So that's also true when you shift it. So measurable, once you see, oh my gosh, it's June and I'm at the $400 mark instead of the $500 mark, trust yourself, you'll figure out a plan. Attainable, that's SMA, attainable. If you just bought a house, it might not be a great year to buy your dream car. So we want to set attainable goals because, again, each one of those small victories, it reinforces your sense of self-esteem, your sense of self, and reinforces your brain in positive ways. And those things are going to serve you much better. We're at SMAR. The R in SMART is relatable. If you want to be able to clearly state your goal to a friend. If you find someone to tell your goals to, you have a 90, if you write down your goals and tell someone about your goals, you have a 98% higher chance of achieving them. Your friend will hold you accountable. You'll feel different once you tell somebody. Like I remember when I wanted to write a book, I started telling people I was going to write a book because even though I had no idea what I was doing or what I was going to write about, I knew because I said it, I would do it. So relatable, and the T in SMART is timely, like what we were speaking about before. This, you're just moving into a new apartment, not the year to plan your dream vacation. So goals need to be smart. And then you have to, create the financial ecosystem to achieve them. And the internal work that we're talking about will help you identify and start to see those ways that you're spending money in ways that aren't that important to you. And simply that, pay attention to everything you spend money on for 2 weeks and then look at it and you'll see that's got nothing to do with my goals. And for a lot of people, just that shift, you were speaking about happiness earlier, that shift in allocating your resources towards what's really important to you, that alone is going to make a tremendous difference in your financial life. So really, being clear on what's important to you and making sure that your resources are moving in that direction. Always ask yourself 3 questions before you spend. Can I afford this? Is it in line with my goals? And if not, why am I doing it? And the why you spend in ways that are not aligned with your goals, it's always there's always a money script at work. So when it comes to wealth building, it's never, ever, 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 ever been easier thanks to technology than it is right now. Did everybody see what happened with GameStop? Now imagine if all those investors would have put all that power behind some smart choices. Stock market. The most important thing to remember when you're investing in stocks is time is your friend. You are also young that from your investments alone, you can retire millionaires. And also, it's never been easier. Oh my God, I wish I would have this to invest in stocks because of apps, micro apps and ETFs. My favorite micro investing app is Stash. And my son turned me on to micro investing several years ago. He was telling me about an app he had seen called Acorns. And Acorns, what they do, it has what's called a roundup feature. So you put your debit card in your Acorn account, and every time you spend money, suppose you spend $4.51, it rounds up. So it's going to round you up to the next dollar. So it's going to take 49 cents and invest it in the stock market. So it's basically investing your spare change. So I let my son do this with my debit card. And after me totally not paying attention, all of a sudden I'm like, it's $1,000. It's a couple $1,000. And I went on a show called The Breakfast Club for the first time. And I talked about the experience and I talked about micro investing. And my interview, that was the first time I was on The Breakfast Club, and I was a financial contributor on the show, and I partnered with one of the hosts, Angela Yee, for this platform I was telling you about. But by the time I walked out of that 20-minute interview, 4 million people had signed up for Acorns. And at the time, the father and son who invented it still owned it. It's gone Hollywood now. Companies bought them, and micro investing's taken on a life of its own. But they didn't realize they created it because the son was in college and him and his friends wanted to invest, and they couldn't afford the minimum down payments were usually a couple $1,000s to invest in mutual funds. So his father knew about something called ETFs, exchange traded funds. It's actually the way most people invest now, which will take a bunch of companies and group them into something that acts like a stock. So it's got a much lower price point. So all these micro apps that you've seen, like Acorn, Stash, all of them, Robinhood, they allow you to invest in ETFs. So what they've done is made investing affordable. So my message on the Breakfast Club was you don't have to be rich to invest. And what the father and son hadn't realized is Black people have one of their money scripts is investing is only for the wealthy. Investing in stocks is only for the wealthy. They had created something that would allow this underserved group to participate in the financial markets. And the message blew up. And I had people, investing in Acorns and things like crazy. And we saw with GameStop through the power of micro investing. Now we're talking about women and money. Women control the world's wealth. Can you imagine if we organized our financial power? We don't have to wait for equality in our economy. We could create our own economy. So it's the mindset. Women believe that they aren't capable of making financial decisions when in reality they control the majority of the world's wealth. What if we only invested in companies that were serious about gender equality? What if we only bought from companies that were serious about how they treated women, were serious about the benefits that they gave to their workers? We're serious. People have to realize, that what we saw with GameStop, the best part about that story, we had the power all along. We have the power. It's always a Wizard of Oz. Click your heels 3 times. You have the power all along. I'll never forget President Obama's last night at the White House when he addressed the nation, and he reminded the people, the government serves the people. We have the power. You have the power. You were born perfect. Just believe. Thank you all so much for spending your time. I really appreciate you showing up.
Thank you so much, Stacey. That was incredible. I've been taking notes and writing down all these websites and apps you're mentioning, and I can't wait to share with our mentors and mentees so they can continue this work and this conversation. I do want to thank everyone else for joining and bringing your stories tonight and sharing with us. It is so wonderful to share space with all of you and to learn with you and to do this work together. Believe it or not, we are in March of this program year, which is so crazy to me that we just have 2 months left. So please keep an eye out to hear from me about a mix and mingle in April and then our closing in May. In the meantime, I wish everyone stay safe, take care. Stacey, thank you so much again. Can't tell you how wonderful this workshop was. And I know looking at these comments that people are going to be thinking about this for a very long time and putting a lot of work in place. So thank you all so much.
Thank you so much. And if you all go to the website teamwealthwednesdays.com and click the button to take the pledge to learn, plan, and act when it comes to your finances, you'll get a free weekly newsletter from me, a free weekly financial newsletter. So that's at teamwealthwednesdays.com and take the pledge. And you can also contact me, and there's great resources in our financial wellness center as well.
Perfect. Thank you, Stacey. I've added it in the chat, so make sure you click and grab it, and I will follow up with an email as well. Have a great night, everyone.
Thank you.